This is Demon Marked, Book 1 of the Venandi Chronicles, an urban paranormal romance series. Written by Sara Snow. Narrated by Selena Salcido and Henry Shader for Hot Ghost Productions.
Chapter 9. Carter. It had been a long, tense day. I prowled the city streets with my hands clenched in my pockets, trying not to think about how hungry I was. On my rounds, I stopped at a cathedral to check in with a Cambian priest who was working as a double agent for the Venandi. Father Michael had chosen to side with the good guys about 15 years ago, and he made the ultimate sacrifice by joining the priesthood. I had to admire him for giving up all worldly pleasures, both human and demonic, to dedicate himself to protecting humankind. But he kept one foot in the realm of demons, stripping off his habit late at night to join their ranks and gather intel on their plans. It was a dangerous, potentially deadly double life that Father Michael led. One false step, one loose word, and the Cambian priest would be nothing but mist and memories. "It's getting ugly out there," Father told me when I stopped by to catch up on his latest adventures. "The skies are teeming with them now. There are incubi and succubi on every street corner. They're forming armies, sowing chaos and havoc wherever they can find a foothold. And lately, they're finding it easier than ever to lure Cambion to their side. Then they're reinforcing their numbers by mating with humans at a rate we've never seen before." "Breeding like rabbits, huh?" I said with a wink. Father Michael chuckled at my lewd humor. "Exactly what I was thinking. Be careful out there. More careful than you think you need to be. They're dragging humans and half-humans off the streets these days. They'll only get bolder as the days march on." I knew the priest wasn't exaggerating. The demonic realm was growing. Groups of slayers like the Venandi were being rapidly outnumbered. As I paced the streets of Chicago, my patrol, I called it, I knew that I was under surveillance. Whenever a cloud crossed the sun, I heard the masses of dark wings overhead, watching and waiting. I headed back to my car at about 6 p.m., ready to go back to the warehouse to meet up with Kingston and the team for their evening meal. It was always tough to sit there while we ate, thinking about the one substance I really craved, but I cared too much about the Venandi to let my feelings show. As I drove, my vibrating phone woke me from my fantasies of blood. "Carter, I need you. Pronto." I recognized Dominic's voice, but I never heard him sound so panicked. Each syllable that he spoke was punctuated by a frantic breath. "What's up? Where are you?" "That park where I always hunt. You know, the one with all the grass." "Well, that narrows it down. Most parks have grass, Dom." I was trying to inject a little humor into our conversation to calm him down, but my strategy didn't work. "Come on, Carter. Don't be a smartass. I need to show you something now, before the cops show up." Dominic gave me a few wild, random directions. I knew the place he was talking about, a stretch of open space frequented by drug dealers, prostitutes, and lost souls seeking a refuge for their criminal encounters. Dominic liked to hunt in that park because the police always dragged their feet when they were summoned there. "Where should I meet you?" "I'm standing by the public bathrooms. This is ugly, Carter. Really ugly." I drove to the park, thinking that I'd probably find Dominic hovering over a half-dead victim, wondering how to finish him off. Driving around the park, I searched for the typical cinderblock cube that housed the public toilet. I parked my car on the outskirts of the lot and walked the remaining distance. What an enchanting place for a twilight rendezvous. A human body wrapped in rags sat slumped against the concrete under a display of graffiti that read, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." No credit to Dante, of course. Clutching his phone to his ear, Dominic came running around the building. Thank God you're here," he gasped. The vampire's face was chalk white, even paler than its usual shade of skimmed milk. "What's this about, Dominic?" I took him by the shoulders to hold his heaving body still. "What's going on?" "Follow me." I let him go and followed him through the park. At dusk, the expanses of grass were empty. Dominic's dark jacket and slacks were spangled with the dull light of the setting sun. Why do vampires always feel the need to wear black? It was a dress code that I'd never followed, being half human. It heightened the differences I already felt like I constantly needed to remind myself of. Dominic led me to a grove of trees at the far end of the park, not far from a deep ravine that separated the open space from the highway. He halted before entering the shadows of the grove, gesturing wildly for me to go ahead. Here it is. Here. Just look. As I stepped into the shelter of the brooding trees, my nostrils picked up an all too familiar scent, an ancient smell pungent and foul with a hint of exotic spices, frankincense and myrrh masking the reek of sulfur. A demon had been here. A very old, very powerful badass of a demon who still had ties to the primitive origins of its supernatural race. The source of Dominic's terror lay at the center of the circle of trees, and I understood why he had been so desperate for me to see it. The body lay spread across the grass in a deliberate, gruesome display. I guessed it to be human from its general anatomy, but the thing was so badly mutilated that I couldn't swear it belonged to any particular species. Its torso had been flayed and cracked open, with an iron rod standing upright in the space that had once been occupied by its sternum. Whatever killed this victim had torn out its heart. The body still had a head and most of a face. Its nose, mouth, and jaw had been half devoured, but its forehead remained intact. That one unbroken expanse of skin was the only unaltered part of this unfortunate creature. Someone, most likely the killer, had etched a single word in Latin across the victim's head. Proditor. Still hiding at the edge of the grove, Dominic whimpered into his hands. "What does it mean, Carter?" he moaned. "It means that you need to get a grip on yourself and let me investigate this." I kept my tone civil, suppressing the urge to choke some sense into my wimpy vampire friend. "But what do those letters mean?" I had to think about that for a minute or two. My Latin was rusty, to say the least. Traitor, I said finally. This human, beast, demon, whatever it is, betrayed someone, and now he or she has paid for it. "Why did I have to be the one to trip over this mess?" Dominic whined, because, of course, it was all about him. The narcissism of pure vampires never ceases to amaze me. "How did you end up finding the body?" I asked. Dominic took a deep breath. "I met this woman. A hooker, obviously, but pretty and so juicy." He licked his lips. "I brought her back here because I knew it would be secluded." Yeah, a real romantic getaway. So, what happened? "Could you cut the fucking sarcasm for 5 seconds? Listen, I brought a girl back here to feed off her. She saw the body first, screaming bloody murder, and ran. I saw what she was looking at, and I called you. I knew it wasn't just another human killing. Look at that thing. It has to be one of those demons you're always chasing." With the pointed tip of his Italian leather shoe, Dominic gestured distastefully at the gaping hole that used to be the victim's rib cage. Tucked under those shattered bones was the long tip of a leathery wing. But that wing was just the beginning. I bent down to look more closely at the victim's chest. The perpetrator hadn't applied much finesse to this killing. The chest had been ripped from throat to diaphragm. The cavity that had once held a beating heart was now a yawning black hole, pierced through by an iron stake. "Do you have a Kleenex or a napkin I could borrow?" I asked Dominic. "Are you kidding?" "No. You're a modern metrosexual vampire, aren't you? You must have a monogrammed hanky in your pocket." "Well, it just so happens that I do have a handkerchief," Dominic said, handing me an impeccably creased square of linen. It gave me great pleasure to use that precious hanky to wipe the gore off the right side of the victim's chest, which was relatively intact. My hunch had been correct. The victim's chest revealed a single crude letter, P. Dominic peered down at me. "Is that some kind of weird tattoo?" "That mark wasn't made with a needle and ink. It was burned into the dude's flesh, see? I pointed at the charred edges of the pea. Its lines were embedded deeply into the victim's skin. It's a brand, I explained. This guy was branded so that no one could ever forget that he was the property of a Major Demonium. Wanna translate that into English, or at least an ancient language that I remember. A major demon. This was an act of vengeance, and the perp felt totally justified in killing this individual. I tipped my head as I scrutinized what was left of the victim's face. The mutilation had been effective, but not effective enough to hide the guy's identity. If I'm not mistaken, I said, I know this person. Or knew him. Vince, he had called himself. He had aspired to become a double agent like Father Michael, walking the fine line between good and evil. Vince had looked me up about 2 weeks ago, asking what it would take to join the Venandi. What's your why? I asked him, copying a riff from some motivational speaker I'd seen on late-night television. Why do you want to join a group of supernatural freaks who are constantly being pursued by demons? With complete sincerity, Vince told me his story. Before he was devoured by a soul eater, Vince had been a full-fledged human. Once a juvenile delinquent, he'd been lucky enough to step into a life that promised a happily ever after ending with a pretty wife and a baby daughter in a crackerbox tract home. Vince worked as a driver for UPS, putting in long hours to pay the mortgage. He didn't mind that his life had turned into an American cliché. He loved his family and felt like he'd finally found his place in the world after years of feeling like an outcast. Then, one afternoon when he was delivering packages in a Chicago suburb, Vince met a demon. This was no Cambion half-breed. It was a ravenous soul-eater who had stolen the skin of a feeble elderly woman. Vince stopped to help the little lady who had dropped a bag of groceries in the street. The frail old woman had peered up at him gratefully from under her broad-brimmed hat and revealed a mouthful of needle-sharp teeth like the fangs of a leech. 3 hours after being engulfed by the Soul Eater, Vince had a brand on his chest and an official membership to the tribe of Paimon, one of the most powerful demons in the world. They say downtown Chicago is dangerous, but it's nothing compared to the suburbs. I'd given Vince my business card and told him to come to the warehouse to meet Kingston and the Venandi that night. He'd never showed up. Until tonight. You're a little late, Vince, I said softly. Too bad you couldn't join us. I bet you would have been a brave warrior. I stood up and straightened my trench coat. Here's your hanky. I extended the bloody rag to Dominic. He recoiled. Ugh! Don't you dare touch me with that thing! What's the matter? I asked. I thought you liked blood. Yes, when it's flowing. Dominic slapped the soiled cloth away. Fine. Suit yourself, Mr. Metrosexual. Then I got serious. Listen, Dom, you have to promise me something. We left the body where it lay and headed back to my car. The park was starting to fill up with the usual crowd of creepers, grifters, and junkies. It wouldn't be long before someone called the cops who would take their sweet time coming out here. Why should I promise you anything? Dominic asked. Because I came out to this godforsaken wasteland when you called me, interrupting what would have been a pleasant evening with the Venandi. Okay, whatever. Tell me what you want me to do. It's what I want you not to do. Don't tell Kingston about this. Not a word. Dominic shrugged. No problem. Kingston and I aren't that tight. Good, because I want you to keep this quiet. I want to be the one to tell him, when it's the right time. There's too much at stake here for the news to come from someone outside the Venandi. May I ask what news you're talking about? No, you may not. Fine. I'll keep my pretty mouth shut. Dominic snipped. I left the vamp at the public toilets to continue his hunt. Even though I'd given him a hard time, I had to admit he did me a favor that night. The Venandi weren't dealing with the bottom feeders of the demon realm anymore. We'd caught the attention of one of the big guns, maybe the biggest of them all, Paimon. Was it a coincidence, or did this ritualistic murder have something to do with the beautiful Cambion I met last night? The message I got from Vince's murder was this. What happened to Vince could happen to any of the Venandi. And now that I'd connected with Georgia, it could happen to her, too. I didn't have time to flirt with the Cambion as much as I would like to. If I wanted to save Georgia's soul, I had to start training her to fight. Yesterday.